Guess I haven't posted a, oh, there we go, update in a while. Trying to see what all we've gotten done since then. Frame has been painted from the firewall forward. Let's see, put the water pump on, thermostat, new belt tensioner, new belt. Got some new plugs and wires on the engine as well. Shocks put on. Starting to rebuild the suspension. All of the upper and lower control arms have been sandblasted and prepped, cleaned, and painted, as well as the knuckles. Take a look at the spindles right there. There we go. Oh hell, I guess it's not very well lit out here tonight. Nevertheless, yeah, went ahead and got this painted, and new wheel bearings, new rotors, same old spindle nut. It was in good shape, as well as a little keyed washer that goes in there. Still, you have to grease them. I'm just for the evening, kind of mocking stuff up. You would not believe the hell I went through trying to get the driver's side wheel off. Somebody put a lug nut on that probably shouldn't have been put on. It was well worn out as far as the hex went. And then they put it on with probably a 6-foot cheater bar. Anyway, ended up having to the old angle grinder out and make 3 pie cuts in it, and then use a chisel to go in and knock each one of these off. Because with these lug nuts in the wheel, the acorn, that 45-degree taper, you kind of see it right there, is in the wheel. I wanted to reuse these wheels. I know they're only 15 by 7, you know, very undesirable. They're everywhere. Probably shouldn't work so hard to keep them, but hey, you know, they're still in good shape, and they're paid for. I'll definitely be putting some nicer wheels on at some point in the future, but I need to drive this truck pretty soon. And I think a fresh set of rubbers on some 15 by 7s will do just fine. So nevertheless, because of that taper, it was down in the wheel. I couldn't cut all the way down into the taper. So I ended up having, about 1/8 inch or so of steel still in there. And my goodness, that was a hell of a deal to try to get that lug nut off that wheel. But prevailed. Only damaged the wheel minorly. You know, a couple of nicks down on the outside of that seat. It's not going to be a big deal. It'll still work. But yeah, got it off. So I went ahead and ordered new lug nuts for the whole damn truck, because F that jazz. Other than that, new upper and lower bushings, along with the rod, I guess you would call that goes between the two. So just bought that whole thing as a kit. Got some Eibach 2-inch lowering springs for the front, 4-inch lowering springs for the back, part of their pro kit. I don't know that really means a whole lot, other than it sounds cool. I went with Eibach because they had a sale on their website, and I could get the backs for 68 bucks. The fronts were still 100 and forgive me if I'm wrong here, $25 or $35. Maybe a little bit more than that. It was close to the same price that you can get a lot of other springs for. What else do we get? New bump stops. I'm very fortunate. I live in Kansas City, and LMC Truck is in Lenexa, which is a suburb of Kansas City, and that means that I don't have to pay shipping when I order stuff from LMC Truck. I just drive over there. You know, they're open until I think it's 5 or 6 o'clock on the weekdays. Maybe it's 7 o'clock on weekdays, and until 4 o'clock on Sunday. Saturday, I don't know what their hours are. Honestly, I'm probably talking out of my ass. I don't for sure know what their hours are, but it's easy for me to call them, order up whatever parts I need, be there in an hour, and pick up whatever it is that I need. So when you I guess you haven't seen it since the engine was in. I really haven't been documenting this build very well, and I'll say that I'll probably do. I'm gonna have to put out there a. I promise that I will pay more attention to documenting this build better. What you're looking at right now is a third generation 5.3 liter. So that means it's got a 24 or 23 tooth reluctor. You know, it has the weaker rods and the weaker pistons, and who the hell knows, maybe a weaker crank too. But at the end of the day, weaker does not mean bad. These engines are incredibly well built from the factory, and you know, I don't know if I encourage you, if you haven't already, take a look at Sloppy Mechanics and what his name's Matt Havel, what he can do with a 5.3 or a 4.8. I mean, he gets insane numbers out of a 4.8. Now, will it last? I would like to say who knows, but really we know it probably won't. But just the fact that he can pull, you know, 500 or 600 horsepower out of a 4.8 liter. I mean, that is the junkyard trash. That stuff this is a 5.3, which I actually think, at least in my neck of the woods, is more popular than the 4.8. At least it is, you know, in the last couple of months. I went down to Pick and Pull, which is one of the self-service salvage yards here in Kansas City. There's actually 3 Pick and Pulls in Kansas City, as well as quite a few, I think at least 3 other self-service salvage yards. And they were having a half-off day. A friend of mine and I went down and we pulled this entire engine, all of its accessories, including the AC compressor, because why the hell not, I guess. It was broke. Well, I assume it was broke. It looked like it was leaking. Sometimes you can tell around an AC compressor, around the front. If it's got kind of grease or an oil spot or a wet area that's localized to the clutch area, you know there's an okay chance that it's probably leaking. Now I will say on a 5.3, probably a 6 liter is also a 4.8, and in the this came out of a 2003 Tahoe. I believe it was a 2003. The AC compressor is actually right down here, and if you look right up here, the oil fill is, and we've all not had a funnel, and we probably should have used one. So that can also be a source of the oil appearing on an AC compressor. But and this is an AC truck. The AC compressor is actually, the evaporator in the evaporator box and some of the shit that goes along with that, sitting in the bed right now. Actually, I pulled it out because this truck had been sitting in a field for a while, and I'm sure it gained most of its leaves while it was still running. They inhale leaves quite a bit. This is my first C10, but I've seen plenty of them so bad that when you kick the heat on and you switch the dampers from like defrost to vent, they blast you with leaves in the face. So I pulled it off. Part of it was I wanted to see what was going on with the sheet metal behind it, which very surprised. You go ahead and zoom in there. There's no rust on this firewall. I can't believe that. There's no rust on this firewall. There's no, I guess some surface rust on the cowl. There's very little. Remember, I live here in the Midwest. We salt our roads more than Wendy's salts its fries. So it's pretty impressive to come across a truck, especially a truck that is from the area. Belton, which is a small little suburb that I grew up in, is just south of here. This still has its 1985 City of Belton sticker on it. So it's fairly safe to say this is a 72. That it has spent its entire life in Kansas City, or at least its vicinity. This does have some rust developing up above the window like they all do, and the rust has gotten through on this side. So I'm going to be pulling the windshield and doing some cutting and welding, which is okay. It's not the first time I've had to do it, and I get better every time I do it. I think the key for me is going to be trying to keep this trim in good shape. It still has the brushed aluminum trim. It's not chrome. This is the aluminum trim. So this is a 3rd gen 5.3. The amount of miles that it has is, I do not know. It came out of a wrecked truck. So I have to make a safe assumption that it was running when it hit something or someone. I turned it over a couple of times with the plugs in it. And while I did not have a compression gauge with me at the junkyard, and it probably wouldn't matter anyway because I don't have a battery with me, I'm not going to haul a car battery through the junkyard. I know some people do. They take a jump pack out there. I didn't, but I did turn it over a couple of times with the plugs that were in it, and I didn't hear anything hissing out of the side of the block like some blown head gaskets can do. I will tell you that when I pulled the spark plugs out, they were the original plugs, or at least they were AC Delco plugs, and they had not been changed in a very long time. There wasn't much left of them. But if you were to look in the exhaust ports, they're not coked in oil. Well, it's no reason to really look right now because I pressure washed the engine. But you can kind of take a look. The valves do have a little bit of carbon buildup on them, which is normal, but most of it is kind of that whitish color, which means that it's, you know, most likely not been burning oil, much oil, if any, at all. I gotta be honest, this thing was actually pretty damn clean. So, at the end of the day, I paid $200 for 200 and change for the entire engine, the entire wiring harness, including some, you know, quite a bit of wiring harness from other parts of the vehicle. I just kind of piled it up there, and they walked out the door for about $200, which is pretty awesome. The what are the downsides here? The stock Tahoe exhaust manifolds will not work with this style. I don't know with other styles of engine mounts, but I know that with this engine mount, so I went with the adapter plates and using the stock engine mount and a stock engine mount towers. I call these towers. I don't know what they're called. They're probably called something stupid like an engine mount bracket. Who would call it that? Anyway, I ordered that adapter plate. It's very similar to the ones from Dirty Dingo, but I'm on a budget, and the ones from Dirty Dingo cut out of steel. I wanted to go with steel. There's nothing wrong with the aluminum ones, I'm sure. I just wanted the ones made of steel. There's probably no reason why the aluminum ones wouldn't work, but I will tell you why these ones wouldn't work. If you look real close, I'm going to try to kind of, well, here we are, talking about how great this is, and now I got to get it to stay somewhere. There we go. If you look real close, right here, where this mount is, I had to grind that back in order for this to sit flush. If you put this adapter plate right up against the block and you tighten it down, if you're not paying attention, i.e. like myself, it starts to bow. And what it happens is this is right here in the bottom, holding it up from laying flat on the block. It was incredibly frustrating because I could not figure out why the things weren't lining up right, and it didn't seem like this plate would have made that difference. later on, probably after about 15 minutes of fiddling around with the engine, getting it back and forth, I realized that that was actually being propped up. So I went ahead and pulled the plate back off, took an angle grinder to it, and clearanced it so that it would fit. Yeah, talking about the build and pricing. It's $200 for the engine, all of the wiring, coil packs, accessories. Couldn't get the fan off the front. I am not running a mechanical fan. I've got, actually from the same salvage yard, the dual electric fan unit from a 2005 or 6 Tahoe. It was in pretty good shape. Couple of cracks here and there, but nothing big. If you ever look at those things, like in a running vehicle, you usually have a couple of cracks. I fired it up, ran it for a little bit on a battery. It seems fine. More importantly, all of the mounting tabs are there. And so what my intention is to modify the radiator core support. That's the newer one that I got with the truck. The original one had a lot of rust in this area. And the gentleman that I purchased this vehicle from, as well as some of the parts, he's a big C10 fan. I swear to God, this guy has to have like 6 or 8 of them sitting at his house. And he's got a pole barn, a pole shed. I don't know, 25 by 60, just stacked full of C10 parts. Actually, I have to call him up pretty soon and see if he has a couple of other things I'm looking for. But nevertheless, he gave me that radiator core support with the truck because the original radiator core support that was in it was rusted out very bad. Mostly in this area. And I'm sure if I thought about it long enough, I'd figure it out. But the reason why it was rusted out is the same reason why you'll see that the original fenders, or even maybe aftermarket fenders that are a little bit older on these trucks, they on this front corner will get rusted out really bad. What happens is the battery sits right here. And especially with the old batteries, back in the 60s and early 70s, most vehicles didn't have maintenance-free batteries. I got to be honest, I don't even know if they existed back then. Maybe they did. But for all intents and purposes, if you're buying a vehicle back in the day, this is well before I was born, but they would have non-sealed lead-acid batteries. And they didn't always, sometimes they would leak. They'd get hot, they would boil. A lot of that electrolyte, I think is what you would call it, battery acid, we'll just call it that, would evaporate out. Now, thank goodness, the frame survived just fine. All of the nicks and kind of roughness here, that's completely my fault. I used a Sawzall to cut the carriage bolt. They use a carriage bolt to hold the radiator core support on. Carriage bolt comes down this way through the bushings, big washer and a nut down here. And that was all nasty, and the radiator core support was so rusted out that I guess I say so. It was rusted out well enough that the carriage bolt would just spin, but it wasn't rusted out so bad that you could pull the carriage bolt out through it. So I had to take a Sawzall and cut it off. And so my idea is, with that new radiator core support, is to give the old angle grinder treatment. Cut it up a little bit, move some of the supports around in it, open it up a little bit more, and then place a radiator from a newer Silverado or Tahoe or Suburban, or insert GM product here that has an LS in it that uses a truck size radiator, and kind of use that. I mean, a lot of the times with swaps, you end up using the original radiator that came with the vehicle, and then you end up having to come up with radiator hoses that are close to fitting. And I think it's kind of funny. There's a episode of over on MCM2, Mighty Car Mod's second channel. There is a show called The Skid Factory, and there's a guy named Alan. He goes by Turbo Yoda. He talks about how he takes a coat hanger or a piece of TIG rod or something to kind of bend an outlet, an outline of about what he needs the radiator hose to look like. So, suppose it's got an outlet over here, or yeah, outlet over here. That'd be inlet. No, that'd be outlet. Outlet over here, and goes into the radiator or the water pump there. So he would bend up a piece of TIG rod to come out, and then over, and then into the radiator there, and then he would go to their automotive parts store down in Australia. The big one, I guess, that they go to a lot is called Super Cheap Auto Parts, something like that. Here you go to O'Reilly, Vance Auto, AutoZone, CarQuest, Napa, Pep Boys. I'm sure somewhere else in the country there's other ones. And you would try to make nice with a guy there at the parts store who would let you go to the back of their parts room and look at all of their hoses up on the wall and see which one came close to working. And that works just fine. I've done it a couple of times, never had a problem with it. What I can say, though, is it's a hell of a lot easier to be able to walk in and say, I need a radiator hose for a 2003 Tahoe. Because that's kind of what we're looking at here. A radiator is going to be in just about the exact same spot as it was in the truck, or the Tahoe, or Silverado, or Sierra, or yeah. So that's the idea of what I want to do with the radiator and the radiator fan, and AC will start kind of going down that road when it gets hot, but it's getting cooler here. I'm much more comfortable when it's cold, or at least cooler. Let's be honest, nobody's comfortable when it's 0 degrees outside, but I'm very, very excited to be able to work in the garage a little bit more. So that's kind of the engine setup. I picked a 4L80E 2-wheel drive up. Actually, I found that on Craigslist up in Omaha. 4L80Es you're going to find, first of all, don't fuck with a 4L60E. You'll spend more time, money, blood, sweat, and tears trying to get the thing to handle any decent amount of power when you can just buy a 4L80E and call it done. They are heavier. I forgot how much they are. I think 60 or so pounds heavier. Maybe, that seems excessive. It's like 30 or 40 pounds heavier. They are heavier. But there's a reason for that. They're built to take more power. Gonna fill you in on a little secret though. All 5.3s have a short snout crank, and only 2 years of the 6 liters have a long snout crank. The rest of them all have short snout cranks. LSs are a little bit different than a small block Chevy. Small block Chevys had a crank, and while the flange changed over time, specifically when they went from a two-piece to a single-piece rear main seal, they changed the dimensions of the flange. That's really the only thing that changed on a small block Chevy, if I remember correctly. Other than that, the distance from the mounting surface of the bell housing, so the back of the block, to the distance to the surface, or I guess the plane at which the torque converter bolts to the back of the crank, always remained the same. LSs are not that way. There's 2 years, and I believe this is the only engine they did this with. The 1999 and the 2000 6 liters, most of them, had a long snout crank, which meant that you could put a 4L80E on them with I believe it's a flat torque flex plate, bolt right on, bolt the transmission on, and the torque converter would be within its mounting tolerances, and I believe that's less than 1/4 of an inch. I'll have to take a look in the manual and elaborate on that. After that, the 6 liter went to a short snout crank, which means the surface of the crank did not stick out as far as it did before. They pulled it in to the same dimensions that the 4.8s and the 5.3s, and presumably the 6.2s, and so on down the line. They changed that. They pulled it back. So in order to bolt a 4L80E up to a 3rd gen that's not those 2 years of a 6 liter or any 4th gen, you have to have an adapter. And the adapter is sold by GM. Got the box up here. And this is the part number. GMP 12563532 flywheel spacer. This is a $53 piece of steel. Jesus Christ, that's expensive. I get that, you know, GM's got to make money, right? And so I just ordered this one. And in order to use this one, you also have to have longer flex plate bolts. The flex plate bolts are bolted to the crank. The flex plate bolts that GM wants to sell you, they want, I believe they wanted either 38 or 42 bucks for them. 6 bolts, and they're a little bit longer, and they have some sort of thread locking compound pre-applied to them. If you go and take a look at ARP, they have ARP bolts, which are generally considered to be a better bolt. Also, the flex plate bolts are stretch bolts. They're torque to yield. They're only one-time use. The ones from APR, I always get those mixed up. ARP, Advanced Racing, something like that. Automotive Racing Products. They were $32, I think, is what I paid for them. And they're reusable. So that was a no-brainer for me. I went ahead and just ordered those. They were cheaper, generally considered to be better, and I don't have to buy them every time I pull the flex plate. Not that I'll be pulling the flex plate weekly on this, but, you know, who knows? I might have to replace that rear main seal. I did not do that, and I guarantee it will come back to bite me in the ass. I figured that I will be in there at some point to replace the torque converter with something with a higher stall. So, let's just try to get this thing running first. But we'll go ahead and go down the engine mounts. I'm using the stock towers, I am using the adapter plate, and I am using replacement OEM motor mounts for the truck. They are the single bolt mounting, I guess, bolt comes up through the little tower there. I know, get your mind out of the gutter. I used those motor mounts, and it went together, but I'll tell you, there was one hell of a gap back here. And if you look down here, these 2 holes were the original mount holes, mount positions for, there's actually a third one down here. You can kind of see it down there. It was right here, right there. So that bolt hole, this bolt hole, and that bolt hole were the original bolt holes for this this mount tower. If you take a look there, this engine mount, let's go ahead and bring the light, the exposure up some. This is already as far forward as it can go. I guess the engine itself is as far back as it'll go. This is one of the adapter plates that has 4 different positions. To be honest, I just needed it to go as far back as it could, and it didn't go back far enough. So I pulled the engine, and originally I measured the distance between this bolt hole, or I guess this bolt back here, which is the closest part of anything to the firewall, and found that I could get it at what I consider to be comfortable distance from the firewall, and I could do that within, I think it's either 2.5 inches or 3 inches. I don't know where my tape measure is. Essentially, I copied this distance from the center of this hole to the center of this hole. I copied that from the center of this hole to right there. And additionally, I did the exact same thing down there. If you look at the frame rails, they are not exactly parallel. But this is a Chevy designed in the mid-60s, which means close enough is precision. So went ahead and slid it back. I think it's 3 inches. Move the whole engine back, which means I got 3 more inches up front. God knows if I'll need it, but we'll find out. Additionally, I got that much more weight moved to between the front and the rear wheels, which is always a good thing. and I didn't have an engine that looks like it's precariously sticking out. Like it just looked weird. What are the other things? Also, this is the stock throttle cable from, I actually need to do a video, just like a write-up on that one. This is the stock cable from the Tahoe. Obviously it works with this intake manifold. I know a lot of people have gone to throttle by wire. I would love to do the same thing, but they had no throttle by wire throttle bodies floating around the salvage yard. All they had was this one, which is the one that came on the engine. But I pulled the old throttle cable out down here, and I'll have it somewhere around here, and found that in order to get this grommet to fit in the firewall, I just had to take a knife and cut some of the nylon away. It's a little square in there, and I just cut that square down a little bit smaller and crushed the tabs in pretty tight, and I was able to feed it in and snap it in. And then on the other side, there on the end of the cable is the cable ferrule. It's kind of late at night. It has a plastic piece that that's snapped on around it or molded around it, and typically that gets fed in through a slot in the throttle cable or in the throttle pedal arm, and kind of snaps into it, and it'll holds it together there. Works fine in the stock, but did not work on this one. So what I did is I cut that plastic away, exposing the metal ferrule, and found that the stock plastic clip that came on the stock cable for the 72C10 snapped onto that cable, and I was able to feed the cable through the throttle pedal arm, snap that little piece of plastic onto the cable ferrule, and then pull the cable in the plastic clip into the arm. So everything snapped together, and sure as shit, the throttle pedal is in the correct location, and I have the correct amount of stroke out of the pedal. The pedal does not touch the floor before opening the throttle blade all the way up. I know a lot of people are probably going to, well, we're going to be pulling way too hard on the cable. Let's be honest. It doesn't pull too hard on the cable. It was like that from the factory. It shouldn't touch the ground. If you're pushing that hard on the pedal and you're worried about snapping a cable, maybe don't push so damn hard. Anyway, it worked out perfectly. I can't believe that it was, kind of that simple. It almost kind of makes me think probably what happened is back in the 50s, some engineer at GM was paid to find out what the proper amount of throw in a throttle pedal would be, and how much how much movement there should be to open up for throttle blades. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were true. But nevertheless, he came up with those numbers, and then that's now gospel. That's what you design your throttle system by at GM. Anyway, it worked out well for me. Very stoked. Yeah. Other than that, not really sure. The stock crossmember does work. A lot of people go to aftermarket crossmembers. I will be no exception. And later on, I'll do a video on it. But the crossmember it just needs to be slid back. I think it's about 4 inches. Have new holes drilled in the frame so that the crossmember can be bolted to the frame. And I'm using the stock transmission mount from a Turbo 350 or 400, whatever would have been used in the any automatic that would have been used for the C10. The bolt spacing on the tail housing has not changed. So, a lot of people don't, I guess some people don't, I guess very few people don't know this. But the 4L60E was based on the Turbo 350. It's evolution, or I guess the bolt spacing has not changed for the transmission mount. What has changed is that this Turbo 4, or this 4L80E and I believe all 4L80s have metric threads. But the tolerances are so open in the mount, and the metric bolts that they use for the transmission mount are so close in diameter to the original SAE size, you don't have to do anything. There's no drilling out the mount. There's no re-drilling holes in the mount. You just put it up there, you put the bolts in, you tighten them up, done. So once you do that, you drop transmission and mount onto the cross member, you bolt it up, and then wherever it lands, you in some way, shape, or form transfer punch or measure or whatever you need to do, and re-drill the frame and bolt it back up, and voila, done. The part I'm trying to figure out is how I'm going to hook the shifter up. I'm kind of looking at the low car cable kit. It is expensive for me. I'm an IT guy, but I work for a public university, so you know I don't make the money you think I do. So I'm trying to investigate other options. I know that I have found a tutorial on 67 to 72 C10 or it's one of those forums, something like that, where he actually moved the entire shift assembly that is original to the truck back far enough so that it is in line with the shift linkage on the 4L80E, and then the rod that comes down from the shift column, from the steering column shifter, and goes down to that bracket that rotates. He lengthened that and seemed to have pretty good luck with that. And so the cable shifter is kind of the way that I'm thinking. Low Car sells a kit that bolts to the steering column and allows you to still use the column shifter, but rather than having a rod going down and turning some sort of mechanism, there's a cable that goes down, and kind of gives you a more precise control of the shifter. And it's only got 7 positions: park, neutral, reverse, and 4 gears. But I'll be daily driving this truck. I don't want to mess with it. I just want it to work. So that might be one of the places where I do spend more than I want to. Because low car parts are really expensive. Really look at it, yeah, it's got a pretty piece of billet aluminum that it's made out of or whatever. But man, I really wish they had like an economy version, which was just made out of like, not polished aluminum and didn't have a steel braided cable or whatever it is. This is gonna be a daily driver truck, and I'm not a big fan of all of that bling anyway, but they seem to be the only company that I know of that offers an option like that, so probably will be what I go with. So I was mentioning that the headers don't fit. The reason, or the exhaust manifolds from the Tahoe don't fit. The reason being is there is part of the casting that comes down and hits this mount tower. That's not a problem with aftermarket swap headers. So I'm going to make the Cardinal Sin. I'm going to order some cheap Chinese mid-length swap headers. They're $179 or something like that for a set. Eventually this will go turboed, probably before the end of next year. But right now I just need the damn thing to start so I can drive to work in it. Yeah, other than that, I think that's about where we're at right now. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to let me know. Just write in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer what I can. Anyway, have a good night.